How many people have already seen Hellier on YouTube? Yeah, outstanding. I was binge watching it while I was at work. Good thing I'm on my own boss. I didn't yell at myself. So I do a morning show on the radio, and like literally between my breaks I'm watching, and I couldn't stop. Once I started, I was hooked. So we're so excited to have, of course, the folks who are involved with the production of Hellier in front of the screen and behind. But this panel is actually going to be moderated by one of the most wonderfully weird people you will ever meet. Yes. And by the way, in case you didn't know, it's his birthday. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome to the stage one of our favorites here at MI Paracon, Mr. John Tenney.
So I heard back there, first of all, hello weirdos. I heard back there, how many of you have seen Hellier? Okay, how many of you do not know what Hellier is? All right, that's what I needed to know right off the bat. If you've ever seen my lectures before, you know that I get fairly weird in my lectures, some of the things that I talk about. Hellier is very close to my mind because it shows investigative techniques and explores ideas that I talk about in my lectures, that people who are on the far fringe, who think deeply and honestly and engaging with themselves about the nature of hauntings and ghosts and UFOs and consciousness and reality and the part that we play in it, and if there is something out there larger and stranger than us, which I think we all agree probably is out there, how it interacts with us. So if you haven't seen Hellier, I beg you to watch it. It is investigation in a way that never really gets shown in the paranormal shows and in the paranormal movies. As paranormal investigators, how many people here have done a paranormal investigation? When you watch it, you will be like, oh yeah, that's what we do. When you watch a television show, you always think like, well, that's not really how that goes. And they've cut that part out and they've stuck this part in. When you watch Hellier, you really understand that this is happening. This is a true documentary. So we're going to explore some of the weird concepts of Hellier and talk about how that can change how we think and the things that we believe about anomalistic and paranormal and supernatural phenomena, and how we can apply that to our lives and become better investigators and more engaged researchers. And to do that, I need the crew and cast of Hellier. So first, Connor Randall, please go out. And of course, Carl Pfeiffer. Last, by no means least, Reg and Dana Neuter.
Hey everybody.
Hi.
So, it's difficult for me, I know you guys so well, and deal with phenomena in a way that is similar to the way you guys deal with phenomena and the way you think about it. To someone who has never seen Hellier before, how do you explain it to someone?
Oh my God.
It's about goblins, but not really.
That's probably a good way of putting it.
I don't know.
You guys clearly haven't been selling the Blu-rays all week.
No, yeah.
These are the guys who've been doing the pitches for the Blu-rays all week.
Yeah, as you can hear in our voices too. Hellier is basically the story of, it starts in 2012. Greg receives a mysterious email from a man named David who was experiencing these strange creatures on his property that was terrorizing his family by night. And they were coming out of this weird mine shaft that was near the back of his property. And oddly enough, he points out he thought they were extraterrestrials, which is a really strange thing to say, given that extraterrestrials typically don't come out of mines, they come out of the sky, right? And he exchanges a few emails with Greg, and then he ups and moves his family out of there because they can't take it, and then he disappears. The email account is deactivated. And it gets weirder and weirder from there. So what we did 5 years later was we finally put together a team to mount an expedition into Hellier and document it with our cameras and the best stuff that we had. And what we were kind of expecting may or may not happen was nothing compared to the nuanced strangeness that wound up actually happening.
So if someone had no idea what Hellier was, honestly, I'm being totally like, that's a good summarization of the beginning. But what do you write in this era of like 140 or 280 characters for people who only read above the fold? Like, how do you describe something as deep and strange and weird and as nuanced as Hellier?
That's the problem that we had marketing Hellier, is because it really started out as a story about goblins or maybe aliens or maybe even like poltergeist activity or cryptozoological creatures. And it's very hard in this day and age to sell all of those things at one time. Like, people like those things categorized because it makes things very simple. So I mean, it was a problem for us even figuring out how are we going to tell people what this thing is about. So it really turned into talking about, well, this is a story about goblins, but so much more than goblins. Because, you know, one of the interesting passages in one of the emails that we received says Hellier was just a symptom. You know, this is all happening in this small town in Kentucky, a mining town that's very depressed. There's not much going on there, and it just seemed like the name in itself is strange for the name of this town, and so it made the perfect title. But in Hellier, something else is going on. The Hellier was just a symptom. The goblins were just a symptom of a bigger, stranger phenomena, and that's what we sort of unwittingly stepped into when we got there. You know, one of the things that Connor says, he says, I thought we were going to go and hang out in this guy's backyard and wait for little creatures to come out of a mine shaft, and it was nothing like that at all. You know, the things and the implications that we find out in the course of the investigation are far-reaching and scary and fascinating and wonderful. And it's a very hard thing to distill down, because it really is more a documentary about the phenomena, period.
Right, so like I said when I first came out, a lot of people who've seen me lecture know that I like to take cryptozoology and ufology and ghost hunting and all of that stuff and try and combine it into something and make it palatable for people. So when you do have something nuanced and you do actually show how these things can be similar, where they might break, the part that you play in them, in the manner that you created Hellier, did you think that it would be, did you specifically try to make it easy for people to see, or did you give them the same difficulty that you seem to experience in the movie? Like, I'm being honest, the movie challenges you, and they are being challenged throughout each of the episodes. Was that purposeful?
It was absolutely purposeful. One of our biggest things, like some people have pointed out too, they're like, you could have made this like a feature-length documentary, and that would have been one thing, you know, to explain the backstory and then hit the beats of what we experienced, and that's the end. But because we were thrown into a situation where a lot of the experiences we were having were so nuanced, synchronicity is a word that comes up a lot in the documentary series. And it's these weird, meaningful coincidences that happen, that when they happen in such a large amount, it starts to feel like something more spiritual or bigger is actually guiding us or happening. You can just explain those, but one of the problems with synchronicities is you try to tell your friends or something about them, and if it doesn't really happen to them, it kind of falls on deaf ears. It's kind of tough to really understand that coincidence. You're just kind of like, oh yeah, you know, whatever, it's weird. So what we tried to do by living this experience for 4 days, we realized you can only really understand this experience by living it alongside of us. And so that's one of the reasons that it grew to be 5 episodes, was because not only do we want to demonstrate what research on the ground looks like and the highs and lows of the drama of what we're experiencing, but also to understand that nuance of 3 episodes in, then some weird thing lines up with something earlier. If that's how you guys could feel the same amount of what the hell that we experienced, then that would be a successful experience of what I was trying to portray.
Not that it's, it's difficult to, this is something that's light years ahead of where we are in this investigation, but take another investigation into high strangeness. John Keel checking out Point Pleasant, West Virginia and the Mothman Prophecies. He wrote a book and he told the entire story of his personal experience. We are, in a sense, trying to document an entire story of high strangeness through film. And so we're putting everything in there. And I'm sure that people get frustrated when they watch it. There's a lot of dead ends, and there was a lot of dead ends in our investigation. And there continue to be more dead ends. But we're going to show it all, so everybody's sort of right along with us, and they can potentially help us out.
So in showing everything, when people who are used to watching paranormal reality shows, paranormal television shows, like I was saying when I first came out, we can obviously tell, as people who have been on investigations, we can tell there's a cut there, we can tell there's a cut there. It might say 3 o'clock in the morning at the bottom, but we know it was probably 11:30 at night. They can say day 15, and we know it was probably still on the first day, and the people are wearing clothes from one day to the next, and we all catch that stuff subtly. So, in Hellier taking its time for stuff, the other thing that people don't see in modern paranormal television shows is they don't see a blending of research styles. So in Hellier you have this jumping off point, which is the email about goblins. But you're also you're investigating a cryptozoological thing, a physical creature that comes out of a mind that someone is calling an alien.
That's 2 things already.
That's already 2 things. And then you have Dana doing tarot. You're doing Estes method ghost box sessions. But you're looking for aliens or a physical creature.
Right. Yes.
Obviously, I love it. I think it's great, right? Like, I don't think you shouldn't be able to hunt ghosts and UFOs in the same way. But were you nervous that people would see you doing what you weren't supposed to be doing, what they were comfortable with seeing on television? Or did you feel like we need to show people that we're investigating differently because they've become so locked into doing it the way they see on television?
I think one of the fun things about that for me as an editor and as a director of this project was I wanted to keep in the stuff that wound up mattering. Sometimes you don't know it for like 2 episodes, but it winds up mattering later, and you call back to it. The rewatch value is excellent, by the way. A little plug there. You notice those little connections even more. But I kept stuff in that mattered. So what I found interesting wasn't just that we were trying to illustrate these things as different research techniques for the principle of it, which is a good idea, but because we got intriguing results from them as well, which only validated the idea initially.
We spent, right, and here's one particular instance that perfectly sums it up that's in the series. We spent an evening in a cave, in a tunnel outside of Hellier. There was one instance in particular where you guys heard a disembodied voice say, "Guys," from the middle of the cave. So we heard seemingly a ghostly voice while we're inside of a cave looking for cryptid creatures to come out, while Greg was hooked up to the Gansfield method and having a potential abduction experience. It was all within the same little time frame there. And that just sort of summarized the whole thing, that incident.
So I mean, I'm telling you all, when I say that it's weird, it's weird. I mean, when you're doing cryptozoological searches in physical caves and having ghost sessions and doing an abduction experiment, like, why though do you think that each of you, why do you think something like that is necessary to show people?
First off, how many people know what a Frank's box is? There's a lot of ghost hunters here. How many people know? How many people know that that was dictated to Frank by aliens? The creation of it. How many people do you think have actually used them to talk to aliens? Nobody! Nobody. So nobody's actually using a Frank's box for what it was designed to do. People are using it to talk to ghosts. I think you absolutely can But that's the type of thing that we're trying with, when we're doing stuff that's like psychical experiments, or we're doing the Estes method and trying to communicate with, we can call them goblins, we can call them, cryptos, we can call them whatever, the ultra-terrestrials, whatever we want to call them. I think that we can use that to speak to anyone. I think we could probably use the Estes method to speak to each other if we wanted to. It'd be a very bad panel for everyone, probably. But we could do it. And I think showing people that that type of thing is possible is very, very important, especially now. People are so accustomed to seeing, there's a fancy gadget that's just for this. There's a fancy gadget just for this. I think we can use those things and utilize them in interesting ways that maybe are a little bit more high concept than just like, this device lets me talk to ghosts. It could be, this device lets me talk to the mass consciousness, tap into it, and bring down visitations from extraterrestrial creatures, or maybe manifest goblins, or whatever it is. That's the stuff that some of the most cutting-edge researchers have been doing for years. Like, this stuff is not new at all. We just like to read a lot and do the type of things that people like, John Keel were doing, and do the types of things that people were doing back in the day. So I think it's really important. And yeah, I was definitely nervous about it, because I think we've been trained to think like, oh, well, that's a sweeping radio, that's made for talking to ghosts, of course. But I feel like, in a way, what we're trying to do with Hellier is a bit of deprogramming for the way people do paranormal research.
Yeah, and I think for us, we went into it initially thinking no rules. We weren't going to limit ourselves. We were going to attempt to do and utilize anything that we possibly could in the moment. And I think that approaching it that way and not limiting ourselves and, kind of repeating that no rules over and over again is what really helped us progress throughout the entire investigation, and continues to do that today. As much as we can stop ourselves from falling into these categories or boxes and throwing everything at the wall and seeing what works, the more we're actually experiencing things and again, like I said, progressing through this investigation.
Well, that's even a part of your background as a magic practitioner. Magic is sort of a very uniting element between a lot of paranormal phenomena. It has connections in a lot of different branches. And so that's one of the things that I always loved about what you brought to it with that kind of background, was already through that a uniting element. And for myself, it comes up in the second episode immediately out of the gate with Hellier. But the Mothman Prophecies, for me, was the book that I read probably in high school, I think, the first time. And luckily enough, it was so early in my career that it informed the concepts of a lot more plurality between the phenomena, between whether it's aliens and poltergeists and cryptids all being thrown together in this one town. Is there a connection? It sure seems so. Is it the same thing? We don't know. But to study that connection and to have that background going into it, before we even knew that the Mothman and Indrid Cold was connected somehow to this Hellier case in a very strange way, that was already informing how we wanted to approach a case that we hoped would be just as dynamic and interesting as that case legendarily was.
I sort of hope that I can personally be I was sort of the first guinea pig for this, and I know that many people out here are ghost hunters. I'm a ghost hunter. That's my bread and butter. Carl and I spent 5 years living up at the Stanley Hotel doing their ghostly stuff. That was our background. That was our background into creating series. We made our own little mini-series up there, and that sort of, in turn, became our training for making Hellier. But and I guess I should clarify, when I signed up for this, I had no idea that I would be reading so many alien books next 2 years, And now it's just entirely changed my worldview and my own view on paranormal phenomena in general. And it is fantastical. This high strangeness stuff. You just eat it up, and so many people get the Hellier bug, and I love it. And we want to continue having contact with everybody who's reading books that we might not be reading. And one of the exercises that we're doing that's helping us, whether it's consciously or not, is we're just saying the phenomena. And so we say that amongst each other, where it's like this person could come up to us in a town and describe poltergeist activity. The phenomena seems to be affecting this person. And just that vernacular, if this little project is able to change something, I hope that it changes that too.
Because it's all encompassing, because it touches on all aspects of weirdness, life, death, everything in between, UFOs and ghosts and monsters and consciousness. You have to really hope that the audience will kind of not open their minds completely, but allow little cracks in their belief systems. Specifically, reading comments that people leave.
Never
about how
read the
they-
comments.
Never read the comments.
I always read the comments.
It's a glutton for punishment.
I love trolls. When you make a series like this, you don't normally see a lot of magic practiced. And in Hellier, Dana does cleansing rituals, she does tarot card pulls. Knowing that you're showing it and that you're releasing it out to a world where a lot of people are like, magic is bad, magic is evil, you shouldn't be doing it around ghosts, you shouldn't be doing it around what you, is, for you personally, was that difficult, or was that just, that's who I am, so I'm just going to do it?
I think it almost is kind of both. I think I was always kind of anticipating that people would be taken aback by what I was doing. But at the same time, for me, you know, the only tool that I use during any paranormal investigation is usually tarot. And most people kind of find that really strange, like, why would you use tarot in a paranormal investigation? And for me, it's always a way to tell a story, to find out what that story actually is. So magic has always felt very intuitive when it came to paranormal investigation. And I think what I was hoping is that Hellier is this really great example of how you could utilize things like magic when it comes to something like paranormal investigation, that we should, if you're a magic practitioner and you're into the paranormal, integrate those things together and see, you know, if it helps progress what you're looking into.
And I think it's interesting, for those of you who haven't seen it when you watch it, there are times when Dana is obviously doing stuff and she's just in the background doing it. Like, it's just happening. And you're like, oh, that's who Dana is. I think that's a really interesting way, because we all know, people who have been on ghost hunts and stuff like that, like, sometimes you just go off on your own and do your own shit, right? Like, you're like, I know these people are over there doing that, I'm gonna go over there because I'm more comfortable doing this. And you don't see that a lot in television. The other thing that's interesting is that Hellier doesn't look like paranormal television.
No.
It has a completely cinematic quality to it. There's no night vision in it, right?
No, none.
Which is super fascinating. But the way that it's shot, who is that? Purely Carl's vision? Yes?
Yeah.
Yes.
So, you obviously wanted to make it beautiful. You're an artist. You wanted to use the majority of your craft to make it look a certain way. But you are dealing with people who for 12 years have watched night vision and shaky cam footage of ghost hunters. So when you make something look beautiful and you make it look like a major motion picture, which are mostly fictionalized, do you worry that someone sees something beautiful and says, it's not real, it's art?
Yes and no, yeah. It's absolutely a component. It was absolutely a component in my thinking. One of the initial kind of ideas behind it was, like, I consume a lot of documentaries looking for inspiration and ideas and nuggets that apply to what I'm doing. Inspiration comes from a lot of the wanting to re-engage with other people's work beyond just watching it and consuming it. So I cut my teeth in my early video days on shows like Chef's Table on Netflix, right? It's just this like gorgeous, cinematic, like artsy, slow motion stuff about like chefs. I'm not a foodie, I'm not like a chef guy, I'm not really interested in the topic, but those shows sucked me in because it was such a fascinating story and a beautiful illustration of it. And I always thought, like, why do we have to have like a cookie cutter style kind of ghost hunting show? Because it's something safe that has worked in the past. Why can't we do something radically different that is both artistic and beautiful and high concept, and bring that to this field that already is like kind of beautiful and artistic and high concept, if that's your take and perspective on it. Thank you. And but the fun twist on that comes, I've always been kind of like a meta, I like to play with the lines between like reality and fiction in my writing. I used to be a writer about 10 years ago when I got out of college. I put out like a book or two. And I love kind of that space between like making something that was fiction feel very visceral and real and blending that personal artistic experience. And the paranormal has always been an interesting dance with that because what's real and what's fiction is always kind of the big question mark at the end of anybody's favorite or least favorite ghost hunting shows. And I thought that that space where everything on screen is 100% real, but it has this cinematic flavor that almost doesn't feel real, is an in-between headspace that I think immediately challenges and makes the viewer think really quickly as they watch it. They're already questioning, they're already engaging, they're already thinking about the possibilities of it. And at the end of the day, I can sit up here and tell you that it's 100% real with no guilt or doubt in my mind, because the thing that feels unreal is not the content, but the presentation. And that's a really fun space to work with that I've never seen before in paranormal reality TV.
So then, this was a kind of deeper dive into the things that we know because of the lives that we've lived dealing with the paranormal community. So if it's possible to do what Hellier does and be beautiful and show real things, something that you can say, everything happened, it's 100% real. Why is everything that's given to all of us look fairly terrible?
Oof, because it's easy. It's
Like
easy.
we deserve all of the time and energy and effort that we put into researching weirdness, right? Like we deserve good stuff. It deserves to look as beautiful as we deserve it to look, because we're dealing with concepts of life and death and the persistence of us after we move on. And it's the deepest, like most important questions. And we are given cookie cutter shows.
So I have an answer for this, and I don't know if Carl agrees with me, but I have a gut feeling that this is the reason. It's because a lot of the people who make these shows, it's their job. There's a lot of people who do this. The cameramen don't believe in the paranormal. The editors don't believe in the paranormal. The network doesn't believe in the paranormal. They know it'll make money, but they don't really believe in it. On this case, everyone who's working on this show, literally the entire crew, believes in it.
Yeah, and the entire crew is like right here.
Right here.
And Rashad was open-minded.
And Rashad,
Yes.
yes.
He was our cameraman in season 1.
Yeah. So I think that makes a huge difference because, you know, even the idea of the dreamlike quality of having it filmed cinematically, you know, even though it's a documentary, lends this weird liminal quality to it where it feels like a dream. And a lot of what we were doing in Hellier feels like a dream, like we're trapped in a maze. Literally one of the titles of one of the episodes is Trapped in a Maze, because it feels dreamlike and we're trying to figure out what's going on and we're confused. And so I think that being part of it and believing in the phenomena, not quite sure what it is, I don't think any of us are ever going to be at the point where we can go, yes, this is what it is and this is what it causes. I think anyone in this room would like to do that, but I don't know if we ever will. So I think that having people who understand that challenge and understand what it feels like behind the camera, behind the music, behind the editing bay, behind the research, behind the marketing, every single step of the way makes the biggest difference in the quality of the stuff. Like, people don't realize that the budget for Hellier was ridiculously small. They don't know that because it doesn't look that way. But it's only because Carl sat and spent night after night after night for a year to make it as good as it could possibly be.
Unofficial Dunkin' Donuts sponsorship. There was a lot of espresso during Americanos all night long. But no, I echo that. I think that what that sums up is I think when you love something, when you make something about it, you make it with love. And I think that translates. I think that also one of the aspects is what we had the ability to do by doing this ourselves is that I think when it comes to like television, it's a business, right? So the ultimate goal between a lot of traditional television is that they want the widest possible audience. If they can get 35 million views on something, they have a massive success because they have that many eyeballs. And so they try to make something that they think would appeal to as many people as possible. We made something that we thought would appeal to some people. And those people were us, primarily.
And the people in this room.
Yeah!
I hope the people in this room, like, you guys have been wonderful with your support. But we made something that was for us. We made the show that we wanted to see. We did the investigation that we wanted to do. And then we made it with love, and we thought, we're gonna put that out there, and we know that there is a tribe of people out there who want that too. And it's not gonna be for everybody. There's gonna be people that leave 1-star reviews because no goblins. But what we wanted to do was
Spoiler, guys. We don't drag a
Goblins,
dead
but
goblin
still.
out of a cave.
That was
at
a
the
big
end.
spoiler for anybody that
Sorry.
hasn't seen it.
Surprise. But we made something that we knew that if we loved it, there would be a big group of people that loved it too, and the other people, like, that's fine. Like, the best stuff out there isn't for everybody, you know?
And I think, you know, we should be clear, like, I'm not dumping on paranormal television. I love paranormal TV. I'm a junkie. And I mean, we're on a lot of paranormal television shows. We love it. When somebody who's a friend of ours who's on a show calls us for help, we go in a heartbeat because it's fantastic and we want to help our friends and be part of it. But what we're saying is really echoing a lot of the frustrations that the people who are on these shows find out. And most people, when they sign up to be on a television show, they don't understand that's how it works. They think they're going to be able to go, well, this is how it happened, and this is what happened, and this. But they don't. They show up, they do what they have to do, they do their jobs, and most of them do it well. And then they have no control over what happens at the end. And that's very frustrating for them, too. And there are very few people who find themselves in the fortunate position, like, you know, Amy and Adam on Kindred Spirits. They're executive producers, so they have a lot of pull, much more than most people do. Most people don't have that opportunity. So from the ground up, we have a text line, the ACBTF text line, and we're constantly asking, what do you think about this? What do you think about this? Hey, check out this poster I just made. What do you think? You think people will respond to it? You know, does this give away too much? Whatever. We are able to be in control every single step of the way, as opposed to somebody who just shows up, does their job, and then has to hope beyond hope that they end up showing people what they actually did.
Right. I was dumping on paranormal television.
Oh no!
Not really. I mean, come on. I watch it, but I'm not a huge fan. But that's neither here nor there. I'm just being honest. Everybody here knows I'm honest. I don't give a shit, right? I can just tell you what I think. It's fine. The thing that interests me, though, is that there is, when people watch paranormal television shows, there can be, in some of them, moments where there is supposed to be some drama. And you can tell, you can tell when someone's bullshitting you, right? And you're like, well, they look kind of worried, but they're not that worried. And when you watch Hellier, like, there is genuine concern for, like, the mental health of the people that you're watching. Specifically, some spoilers here, right? I was in bed sleeping one night and got a phone call. I didn't know that there was a documentary being made, and I just picked up the phone. And spoilers, you'll see this in the movie. I tell them, like, you will lose your fucking minds if you continue down this road. Because when I saw it afterwards, I was like, oh, I didn't know I was giving them such good advice.
We did. That's why we call John Tenney at 3 in the morning.
When maybe it hasn't. I mean, are you concerned when dealing with the phenomena as it sometimes presents itself? Do you become concerned with your mental health?
I think the nice thing about it being like the four of us is usually when someone spirals down the rabbit hole of craziness, they have a lifeline of people to kind of pull them back out again. So it's nice that, and it has happened, you know, I think to each one of us at certain points, where you just spiral down into that space where you're right, you can go crazy. But luckily we have, you know, a group of people that can kind of pull them back out again. But it happens for sure.
There's been several moments, and you're going to see a lot in season 2, where we're just totally unkempt and whoever we were in the room with, we would be like, can you film this with your iPhone? You know, there's a lot of Greg just sitting there at 7 in the morning, you know, reading all this stuff that's coming in about Hellier. And there are absolutely moments where you get completely lost. Where I sit there, for me, we each have different pieces of the case. We each have giant boards that take up entire living room walls in our house.
It's a lot of True Detective walls.
Yeah.
Our poor significant others.
But like for me, more recently, some of that has been the numbers. Use the numbers from Terry Wrist. And we're all trying to tear that apart so hard. and we're finding all of these different things. And you will just sit and you can just rattle off all 16 numbers in a row, and you dive into the cipher, and you dive into, it's absolutely a rabbit hole. And sometimes living Carl and I are in Colorado, and Reg and Dana are in Kentucky, we have to contact each other when we find something out, and they will. They'll say, dial it back a little bit, and it's good. It's healthy.
I echo Dana that I think that the biggest strength we have is our numbers. A lot of people that I think struggled with those rabbit holes in the past, UFO researchers, etc., that Tenny was warning us about, I think a lot of them were individuals. They had a community at the time, but I think it was much more isolated. And we found each other, and we've got that support. Greg's always been super aware of when, like, he's always kind of resisted this case because he knows that he would go down that rabbit hole and maybe not come out. So he's always like kind of walked around that line, engages in it, and then kind of pulls back. A lot of the stuff that happens in season 2 that you guys will see is a lot of just like having to shut down that engagement for mental and personal safety. Like it's crazy. But for me, I've always had the benefit of being behind the camera in the edit bay. That for me, I go down these rabbit holes and I want to get weird and I want to get crazy, I want to have experiences, but at the end of the day, I know that this needs to be concrete in a way that you guys can follow at the end of the day, and isn't just high strangest conjecture and conversations and wackiness and losing my mind and battling about numbers on a wall or something like that, because it has to make sense. So I'm constantly grounded in the sensible narrative of story that is kind of saving that. So good thing we can't get canceled.
Well, that's actually a funny point, the whole idea about good thing we can't get canceled, because, you know, Tenny was talking earlier about reading the comments. You know, I, for the longest time, was reading them, and it's so funny because the pattern started to form after a while. I was joking about this the other day on Twitter. Hellier has a solid 3-star out of 5 rating, right? Like, right in the middle of the road. But it's not because people are rating it in the middle of the road. It's because 40% of the people were 1-starring it, literally with like reviews that said, there's no goblins in this, fuck this, it's 1 star. And then there are 40% who are like, this changed my life. So there's no like warm, it's either hot or cold, and you don't really ever see that. That's what I think is really fascinating about this, because again, if it was a 3-star thing, it might be canceled. But there's enough people who are going, holy shit, what you're onto is big and it's important, and it's changed the way that I see this phenomenon. Like, people are reading books because of Hellier. I don't know terribly many paranormal shows that are making people go out and buy a bunch of books. That would be fantastic. That's something that we could use more of. So like, the book list for season 2 is like 5 times as big as the book list for season 1, so everybody who watches it's gonna go broke.
So it is interesting because we had a conversation a few years ago on Mackinac Island, you and I said to you, like, it's interesting when someone gets something always right, but it's just as interesting when someone gets something always wrong. So to cause a visceral reaction, either 1 star, no goblins, screw this thing, or 5 stars, my mind was blown and now I have 35 books I need to read. Like, the fact that it has a visceral response and makes people feel something is unique. Because a lot of people do watch shows just to kind of zone out and watch some silly stuff happen and whatever. Do you think you released it into the wild all by yourselves and you gave it away for free? Like, here you go, just watch it. Does that have an effect on how people respond to it?
I think one of the problems that we had with the way that we released it, and it's not even really a problem, because like, it was a lot of hype. There was a lot of hype. There were a lot of people who knew about this case. There were a lot of really big outlets that covered it, and we had sent screeners to a lot of these outlets, and they loved it. They thought it was fantastic, and they were talking about how they think it's going to be a classic thing. It maybe not be appreciated fully right away, but there was so much hype, and the fact that it was free was kind of a double-edged sword, because there were a lot of people who really expected that it was going to be a show, a cryptozoological goblin hunting show. They thought we were gonna find goblins, like that was the point. And so, you know, they thought it was gonna be like finding goblins. Not finding Bigfoot, but finding goblins. And when it wasn't, they were very disappointed, but the fact they had such visceral reactions to it, again, very interesting. But because we released it for free to anyone, We wanted as many people to see it as possible. The act of actually releasing it for free became part of the case because so many people who might not otherwise be able to watch it because of region restrictions, because of not having cable, because of not being able to afford to buy it on iTunes or whatever, were able to reach out to us and go, hey, I have information that's helpful to you. It literally, like, our case files are insane. I have a stack of emails as big as my head from people who had similar experiences or people who thought they knew what this meant in the series or what this meant or knew somebody we were looking for in the series or gave us a tip on how to research something. So releasing it for free became part of the case.
So, we've talked about like Bigfooters and alien people and ghost people and how it's kind of this melange, like this ice cream sundae of all those ideas. And I touched on, for a moment, like Dana having some magical practices in it. For people who aren't aware of the things that go on behind the scenes, how surprised were you, all of you, that Hellier, for those of you who don't know, and I'm sure a lot of you do, we're a very diverse weirdo crowd, which is why I can ask questions like this. There's a huge magical community, witchcraft community, magic practitioners, ritual magicians. How surprised were you that they showed up as people who watched this documentary? Because they are notoriously quiet, and they keep to themselves. Usually, whether it's the OTO or whoever, all of the rituals are done in secret. But I know even people with Masonic backgrounds, any type of these kind of old world traditions kind of showed up once this showed up on the scene. Were you ever expecting that to happen?
I think I was hoping that it would. And I think that there's something, one of the things that people say a lot to us, specifically obviously about Hellier, is that it leaves them with a feeling, something that feels very familiar, but they have never really been able to put their finger on. And maybe there are elements of Hellier that they've experienced in their own life, but there's never been anything that's been made into a documentary or a series that has sort of highlighted that kind of stuff. And really, in a lot of ways, it is kind of a very personal feeling. So I think for me personally, I was hoping that it would resonate with that community because I feel like they're very much so in touch with those types of feelings. And I think Carl did such a beautiful job at really creating a vibe. There's a vibe that kind of emanates. There's an energy that like emanates out of Hellier, and I think people feel it. Like they've been hit with a tuning fork, and there's something about it that just feels so familiar, and they haven't necessarily had a word for it or anything that would represent it. And kind of there's something that is there now for it, and it's continuing to do that. I think more and more and more the more people watch it.
Carl, did you think you were going to have to deal with magicians? And I don't mean magicians as in prestidigitation and illusionists, but like magic practitioners.
It didn't ever really cross my mind outside of one case, obviously. Greenfield, like he shows up in the first season, this guy that wrote this book that ties in with this interview with this guy named Terry Rist, who we know Greg. That element of it I was very surprised by. Like I never really knew what to do with that part. I liked the variety and the intrigue, but I never expected, because I don't know much about the ritual magic world. That's, Hellier might have prompted the alien dive, but like it also prompted this like, what's the world of magic like? Because I never looked into that. It's always been kind of taboo, right? I don't know much about it. And so I didn't know to expect that we would get the response that we did. And my own kind of journey of talking to Reg and Dana, who are fielding these responses and know about this world, that's when I start to go, this is starting to become something else that I had no idea it was the whole time. And that starts to inform parts of season 2 right now, because there's an aspect of this that's very ritualistic. And when I made season 1, that was not in my brain. And that's very surprising.
Not that he knew it was in his brain.
What's that?
Not that you knew it was in your brain.
Indeed.
Because there's a lot of weird stuff that's been going on where it's like, how did we know to do this at this time, at this place? And there's ritual magicians that are reaching out to us going, you're doing a ritual. You guys know this, right? You're doing a ritual. And that's scary, but interesting, And we never anticipated that it would come to that. I think, there's a magical feel to Hellier, but I never anticipated that there would be magicians going, "You're doing something for someone."
So when Hellier has a lot of questions. I mean, it starts with the emails from this gentleman named David Christie who sees his goblins, and that's the kind of spark that leads to views, and there's other people involved, and the mystery behind who these people are and why they're seeing what they're seeing and experiencing what they're experiencing, how they're experiencing. I mean, that's the major kind of path that you start down. So there's a season 2.
Yes, there is.
And for the benefit of people watching who aren't kind of behind the scenes, when did season 2 begin? What was the beginning point? Like, without spoilers for season 1 for those who haven't seen it. Like, how long after the events of season 1 do season 2 begin?
We let Carl answer that question. I feel like we're gonna let Carl answer that question.
Because we're living this case, it obviously never stops, but in terms of the narrative, we pick up with the case about a year after Hellier 1. There was a lot of time needed in there to decompress from the case, and there was things that happened in that interim that made us genuinely question whether we wanted to keep doing this for our own safety and sanity. And there's something you said to us when we were discussing season 1 before it came out, John, that you thought that dealing with this type of phenomena is best illustrated not temporally, so out of order, right? Like, chronological order doesn't do it justice. I wound up rejecting that advice and sharing season 1 in a very linear fashion. You follow us through this case. Season 2 is very non-linear. It jumps around a lot. Through that time period of the 14 months between season 1 and season 2, in the real-time investigations that we do, and we make those connections in the research and in the experiences, because it's been a total pain to try to be like, how do we follow up on this thread when there's this new thing we have to talk about, but then this new thing comes here. You're like, it's been a challenge for me that keeps me excited about my work. But season 2 picks up about 14 months later.
So season 2, you said, is not chronologically straight, it kind of jumps all over?
Yeah, there's like key beats that keep.
Like, I just wanted to point out, since you rejected my original idea,
Yes.
after releasing the first season, you were like, "Oh yeah, we have to tell it chronologically."
The phenomena also forced my hand. It's got to be the phenomena that makes me follow your advice.
Really quickly, I'm going to take a couple questions real quick. But first, one of the things, Connor, in Hellier, you become a very large focal point. You seem very receptive to the phenomenon. How does that impact your day-to-day life? You went out to find goblins.
Right. So, I went out because I knew about audio equipment. I went out to film. I went out to put the recorder over Greg Newkirk's face, and then they were like, "Connor, you're really good at the Estes method. You know, Carl and I and Michelle Tate, we sort of started that, and I had a vision, and that vision is currently sitting in the tent. It's been 5 feet away from me all weekend, right? The bizarreness of that really can't be overstated to me. Like I said, am a ghost guy, and suddenly received the clearest vision. To give more clarity to it, I should clarify, what I saw was a table that was sort of folded up, like a ping pong table, like up against a wall, in this room that I sort of recognized, and it had on it the can, and it was a bright pink tablecloth. So those are details that aren't necessarily in there, and I just said, and I've never been so glad that I said something. So that goes for everything, for airport security and for paranormal investigation. If you see something, say something. because the phenomena will speak to you. We are continuously working on more experiments, and I practice. You know, I'm practicing that sort of meditative state. I don't think Greg thinks that it's a sort of psychical lubricant in a sense to be able to allow you to get in contact with these entities. I think you have to be a really good listener. There might be something to that, but I really felt more compelled than ever to be in the case. Reg and Dana received the emails. Carl had some bizarre synchronicity that led him to it, and then the case gave me a vision of a tin can, and here I am.
Spoilers for anyone who hasn't seen it. I would take a couple questions because we only have a few minutes left. Does anyone have a question for any of these people? Someone? Yes?
It's not a question. I just want to thank you for shooting it the way you do, because not only the other shows are too much to watch, you don't get involved.
Thank you.
No.
That involved.
Yes, she was thanking them for making it the way they did because people want to be involved, and Hellier gets you involved, whether it's emotionally or psychologically. You're there with them, and so she was just saying thank you to you guys.
You're welcome. Thank you for saying that and picking up on that. It's a cool case too because it's literally it's ongoing and it's real, and you have a lot of the information that we have, and the next lead could literally like come from anyone. You know, it's kind of a democratized TV show in that way too, which is super cool.
Do you think, before I look for another question, do you think, honestly, to yourselves, like when you think about Hellier, someone who was only interested in Bigfoot, is it okay for them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Someone who only believes in ghosts?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Someone who only believes in aliens?
Yeah. And I think that by the end of it, they might believe in other things too. And that's kind of one of the biggest points of Hellier, is to reach people on some level and say, listen, there's something bigger and stranger going on than all of these things. So maybe it will change the way that somebody believes if they just give it a shot. If they say, well, I'm not really into goblins, but, you know, I'll give it a shot. They might change the way that they believe about the phenomenon.
All right, any questions? We're running down to 6 minutes. Yeah? Oh, go ahead.
Do you think it's possible that David never existed? That this...
So there's a main character, for those of you who haven't seen Hellier 1, David Christie is the one who first sent the email that sparked the whole documentary, and she's asking, do you think there's that chance that...
I mean, I don't know how these guys feel now, but I'm under the impression he doesn't exist. You know, one of the things that I said in the series is, you know, David's a ghost, and I think he's as close to a ghost as can be. I mean, the thing is, somebody sent those emails. Was it a guy named David Christie? I do not believe so.
But to counter that, there has been some physical...
That's the
evidence.
weird part. I don't think David exists, but David exists. There's a really weird, it's exactly what we're talking about with Tenny. Like, there's ample evidence that David exists. Ample.
Yeah.
But there's also ample evidence that he does not exist. He himself is a liminal state. I don't know how else to quantify it. So I think it's absolutely possible that he's not a real person. But somebody is a real person. Somebody said it.
Greg had a great soundbite in an interview in season 2 where he talks about this case constantly prompting him to A/B test reality. If A, then what does that mean? If B, then what does that mean? And the weirdest part is that while we still go back and forth between did David exist, does he not exist, they still point at the same thing, which is something is happening. And that's truly bizarre to get to a point in a case where the reality of the hoax or the phenomena does not change the phenomena. We're painting this picture outside of the lines via negativa in the negative space. Like we're getting this picture of the phenomena independent of that initial tangible spooky story.
I think he exists. I think there's been something to show that potentially he does. Those footprints were very real, and then there's even more stuff coming out. Those emails were sent by somebody.
If this is just me musing now to you guys. If someone sent those and David Christie didn't exist, is it possible now that millions of people have seen Hellier that David Christie does now exist?
It's a very astute question.
Yeah.
You guys know this. I'm always wondering if we can make shit with our minds. Like now that 1 million people have watched it and thought about what he is, can he be?
I realize we're running short on time, but really quick. There's something that didn't make the season. We don't really talk about it. There's a lot, by the way, there's a lot of stuff that we cut out because it was too weird. And we just didn't think people would understand. I'm not saying that's not going to come back around. Trust me.
Carl.
But one of the things that we started to notice, and it didn't happen to everybody, but one of the things we started to notice is that people who were involved in the case started having memory problems after we visited Hellier. Like really weird ones, to the point where it's very simple, strange things we can't remember. And it almost makes me go, are we changing the past? So sit with that.
All right, I'm gonna have to get close to wrapping this up. So we have 3 minutes, and I know that we have 2 minutes of something. So is there any way we can get the lights to dim a little bit? So you all will be the first people to see the trailer for Hellier 2. This is the first time it will ever be shown, right?
Yep, first time.
So, perfect timing down there.
All right,
Here we go.
here we go.
Literally, there have been half a dozen people who've come and said, you know, you're doing a ritual for Greenfield, right? It's other people, it's ritual magicians that are coming in and saying, you guys are doing a ritual. It's obvious. You guys are being initiated for something.
This is the most intense and largest mystery that I've ever investigated.
The minute that we stepped foot in Hellier, like, weird stuff started to, there was something weird that happened, something changed the minute we stepped foot in there. And it feels like everything after that has been a response.
And Greg picks up the phone. He goes, I've been waiting for you to call me. You won't believe what just happened. I go, what? The email started again.
I lost my shit. I didn't know who to trust.
3:18 p.m., another email.
I was not serious.
The wrist stuff was scary. But the new emails were legitimately terrifying.
I feel Rist has the answer to it all.
I cannot believe this is happening.
If there's something watching or someone watching, oh shit, they don't hear me. I don't like this one.
Oh, I'll give you the message again. You're being guided.
The occult, cannibalism, human sacrifice, child torture, cave captives, creatures, everything.
I am so paranoid and confused.
I'm scared of monsters. They're so close. I'm here. I'm fucking here. Shit is so fucking here.
What is going on?
I would be remiss, first of all, thank you guys for doing this and talking to everybody, and I'm sure everybody will have questions and want to talk to you, whatever, but I would be remiss to not point out Tyler Strand. November 29th,
Black Friday.
Black Friday.
We will be exclusively on Amazon Prime for 2 weeks. Black Friday starts, and then Friday the 13th in December goes live for free everywhere else.
So thank you all for coming. Check out Hellier, Reg, Dana, Carl.
Thank you,
Brian.
everybody.
Thank you so